Welcome to Unleash Leadership, the podcast where bold leaders and changemakers come together to share their stories, strategies, and insights for creating a lasting impact on society. Karla Blanco is your host. For over 28 years, she has been navigating the complexities of the corporate and government worlds, a journey that's taught her that authentic leadership isn't just about climbing the ladder. It's about lifting others as you rise. Along the way, she uncovered the unwritten rules that drive success, the ones no one tells you about, but that can define your career and legacy. On this podcast, she'll sit down with extraordinary guests from around the globe, leaders, visionaries, and innovators who are leaving their mark on the world. Together, they'll explore their journeys, uncover their tips and tricks, and dive into the challenges they've overcome to inspire you to excel in whatever you're facing. Whether you're climbing the corporate ranks, building your personal brand, or leading change in your community, this podcast is your space to grow, learn, and unleash the leader within. So grab a notebook, get ready to take action, and join us on this journey to unleash our leadership potential. Before we dive in, make sure to follow Karla on Instagram, LinkedIn, at Karla Blanco Coach, Karla with a K, and YouTube at Karla Blanco Show to stay connected and get even more leadership tips and updates.
Today, I'm delighted to introduce Urs Koenig, a seasoned leadership expert, military peacekeeping commander, loving brother, son, and dad, ultraendurance champion, black coffee junkie, and best-selling author. He is the founder of Radical Humility Leadership Institute. He shares insights on balancing humility and confidence, cultivating resilience, leveraging transformative experiences, and fostering collaboration across diverse teams. Urs shares his unique journey and actionable strategies to inspire impactful leadership. Urs, welcome to the show. It's an honor to have you here. Urs, tell us about your journey, your leadership journey, and I would like to learn about your papi, your dad, and more about your sons too.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me, Karla. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. So, as you can tell, much like your host, Karla, I have an accent. So, I did not grow up in the US. I am from Switzerland originally. So, I grew up in Switzerland outside of Zurich with two younger sisters and went to school there, university. I'll just give you the high level and I come back to my family. And then I moved to Australia for my academic work as a geographer of all things. Actually, I wrote a PhD in geography on climate change impact research many years ago and lived in Australia for 7 years. And then I moved to the US, dear Lord, 24 years ago. And that's when I transitioned into leadership development. But yeah, I grew up in a very athletic and a very shall we say, performance conscious family. My dad, as those of you who have or will read the book that I wrote on radical humility will know, was an incredibly important person in my life. He was a hard driver. He was a professor for mathematics at the University of Zurich. He was a corporate executive, very successful in his life. He was also an uber athlete. That's probably where me and my sisters got our athletic endeavors from, but he was also a deeply humble leader. So, and he really embodied what I call tough on results and tender on people. He had incredibly high standards for us as kids, but he was also very tender in his delivery. I share a story in the book where I forgot on one of my scout trips as a 12-year-old the most important item, which is the first aid item. And my dad, he rode his bike to meet me, to pick me up. He wasn't driving me. He was tough on results. I had to ride my bike, but he was riding his bike to pick me up. And on the way home, when we were pushing the bike uphill, a steep hill, he wanted to know all about my weekend. He really was tender on people by caring about my experience. He was an avid scout as well. But then he told me, Urs, you forgot the most important thing. Do you know what it was? And I had no idea. It was the first aid kit. And his delivery was tough. He was, that's weak, Urs. You cannot forget your first aid kit. So my dad was incredibly important in my upbringing. And as I share in my book, he also left this earth the way he lived it, straight as an arrow and on his own terms indeed. So yeah, so that's my upbringing. I'm still very close to my family. They're all in Europe, to both my sisters and my mom. And I was just sharing with Karla in the green room before we started. I'm actually going over to Switzerland next week with my two boys to visit family.
Thank you so much for sharing. And what inspired you from the book that I'm trying to share here, from the book to creating an institute? So, why to create an institute?
I really want to spread the message of the importance of humility to as many people as I possibly can. And the Leadership Institute is still work in progress. We're working on online training, potentially a new book, potentially more white papers, more research. So whatever I can do in my speaking, in my writing, in my collaboration with others to spread, especially in this day and age, to spread the importance of humble leadership. And we can talk more about that, not because it's the right thing to do by your people, but also because I strongly believe that it's the key to winning in today's complex world.
Yes, and you get results on the business. So it has a high ROI for the business. I really appreciate that. And can you share about the framework and the 5 shifts that you have the extensive research and your experience? So share with us about them.
So I organized the book into 5 shifts, as you say, Karla. And so if I super briefly talk about them, the first shift is what I call dig deep, which is deep self-awareness. And that's what people often think of when they think of humble leadership or humility. I see myself accurately. I see myself in line with how others see me. And to be clear, that obviously means I'm not arrogant, but it also means I'm not too modest, not too humble. So I see myself accurately. So that's deep self-awareness. There is a section in there where I also talk about having the humility to know that I can't do everything, but I can do almost anything if I put my mind to it. So it's this notion of stop doing lists, of focus, of saying no to things, which for so many of us is incredibly difficult because there's always the next big shiny project to be chased or the next clients to be worked for. So that's the first shift, dig deep. The next 3 shifts are not about self-awareness, but about one-on-one leadership. And so this is leading relationally versus simply by content expertise, which is, if you boil it down, the core of humble leadership is really a more relational leadership approach where I see my people, my team members, my employees, my staff as whole human beings versus just, cogs in a wheel who get stuff done for me. So the first one is in this shift is the tough and results-centered on people, which I mentioned earlier, holding my people to the highest standards while building meaningful and trusting relationships with them. And so that is probably the one that's closest to my heart. And the subtitle of my book is indeed Be a Badass Leader, i.e. tough on results and a good human. So this notion that we either have to be a good human or a kind person or a tough leader is a false dichotomy. We can all courageously do hard things in a human way. So that's the second shift. The third shift is this notion of leading like a compass. So this is all about these buzzwords of empowerment, delegation. So how do I actually get my people at the front lines to do the stuff we all want them to do without me constantly hovering over them? And one core element in that shift is this clarity of a common goal, clarity of one common goal. And I challenge my clients when I give speeches and workshops often on this notion. Sit down with your team members and ask yourself, what is the one thing, not 3, the one thing we need to do extraordinarily well around here in order to win? And it can be time bound too, between now and August 1st. What's the one thing? So that's that shift. The next one is full transparency. So this is about being transparent as much as we can. I live in the real world too. Sometimes stuff is confidential. I get it. But about strategy, goals. And as leaders, we can never over communicate intentions, goals, and strategy. There's so much research. I think I quote one study in the book where people who are actually in charge of implementing corporate strategy can't even name the top 3 strategic initiatives of their company. So we can never over communicate as leaders around goals and strategy. And an important part in there, in the full transparency, is something that's very close to my heart. Being transparent and appropriately vulnerable about my own weaknesses, my own shortcomings as a leader. And this is a whole conversation we can have by itself, but this notion of showing up with appropriate vulnerability being the quickest way to build trust. So all this is one-on-one, tough on results, tender on people, lead like a compass, full transparency. And then the last shift is championing a fearless culture. So this is then team and organization wide. So I'll go from self to one-on-one to team organization wide. So this, leaning heavily on the work of Amy Ebenson, is about championing a fearless, a psychologically safe culture where it's safe for everybody to speak up, questions, concerns, crazy ideas without fear of being shamed or worse, risking their careers. So that's a lot, I know, and that is that's the framework of the 5 shifts that I outline in my book.
Well, I would love to listen more, probably hours. I would love to be sitting here with you. I have many questions. And I would like to learn about the blind spots, because in the first shift, you mentioned them, from blind spots to self-awareness, how people can learn about their blind spots.
So first, let's talk about what blind spots are, right? So we all have the public self. That's everybody knows about Karla. I know it, and you know it about yourself. Then there's the private self, the things that you keep to yourself. You know, but other people don't. And then it's the famous blind spots, the stuff everybody knows about me or about you, but you don't have self-awareness around it. And anybody, and I know we're both in leadership development, of course, you and I, Karla, everybody who's done a 360 knows how painful it is when for the first time at least, when you read the report of what comes back. Why? Because people give you their, excuse my French, no BS, straight feedback because it's anonymous. And so that's, and most of my clients, I don't do much coaching anymore these days, but I used to do a lot of 360s. And for most of the clients, they look at the report and they go, yeah, sure, I can see that, I can see that. And between 60 and 80% of the stuff, we go, yeah, I can see that. And then there's 10 to 30%, we go, I had no idea I'm doing that. And that is the blind spot, or are the blind spots, right? So the stuff everybody knows about us, but we have little self-awareness. And the irony of social life and work is that unless we take concrete and tangible actions to reduce the blind spots, they will always be there. So how do we do that? And so, I just mentioned a very common tool, which is a 360. We can administer to discover our blind spots. But even if you don't have the capabilities or the willingness to do that, simply asking for regular feedback from your teammates on how you're doing as their leader. And so this, when you do your weekly one-on-one, which you should absolutely do, all the research shows that when we have weekly one-on-ones with our team members, they hang around longer, they're more engaged, and they perform better. So again, whole separate conversation, the importance of the weekly one-on-one. At the end of the weekly one-on-one, get into the habit of simply asking these 2 questions. What do I do well as your manager, Karla? And what can I do better? And I have also a section in the book, because sometimes people are afraid to give you honest answers, honest feedback, so you can actually battle that by facing it head on and saying, maybe you're a bit afraid to give me honest feedback. And, I feel the same way sometimes with my boss, but I actually see your ability, Karla, to give me honest feedback on my performance as part of your professionalism. You can also say things like, you may have some self-awareness around some of the things that you want to get better at. You say, well, Sometimes I know, Carla, I move a bit too fast. I don't bring everybody on board. I know that about myself. So give me some feedback on how I'm doing on this. So you identify something that you know you want to work on, and then it makes it a bit less personal. You then invite the other person to give you feedback on a goal you already identified. So get into the regular habit of asking for that feedback. And I'm very much work in progress. I have a lot to learn, but that's one of the things I do well in each of the positions. And when I was serving as a peacekeeper in the Balkans, I did do that, and I learned small little tiny things that I could easily correct before they became big issues. So get into the habit to regularly ask for that feedback. Don't make it every 6 months, every 12 months, like it's this scary big thing. No, every single week. And what then you'll also find is that when people start to give you regular feedback, they often start to think, maybe I can do the same thing. Maybe I can ask my team members, or if you are a leader of leaders, or I can ask my colleagues on what I can do better as well. So at the best of times, it becomes a two-way conversation. You tell me what you see me do well and what I can improve, and I do the same for you. So it's a very simple thing. All of this stuff is super simple, but it's not always easy, right? So that's the feedback part.
And actually, all those are the unwritten rules that you learn as you grow in your career. When you were sharing about that, I just recall a situation where 15 years ago, when I joined the executive team, so I was brand new. Presence is a gift, and that general manager called me separately on a one-on-one, and he told me, I need you to put your cell phone away in the meetings, because of course I was in charge of the relationship with government, so I was on it constantly, and that was a great gift. So definitely feedback is a gift, but it's hard, as you mentioned, sometimes to receive it and sometimes even to give it. I really appreciate that. Let's move into your experience as a pacemaker with United Nations and NATO. I read in your book about your experience in Kosovo, and stories make us, and it was impactful for you. And as I hear and I watch some of your videos, and I was when reading the book is like listening to you. I listen your voice. It's so interesting effect. And tell us about that experience. So it would be really nice to listen from you with the kids and what you experienced there.
Absolutely, yeah. So just for context, as I mentioned, I'm a Swiss national, so we all have national service in Switzerland. So every male Swiss citizen has to serve in the armed forces. And so I did that many years ago. But then I moved abroad, as I mentioned earlier, and when you move abroad, they de-enlist you from the armed forces. So I went back after having been out for 22 years into the military to serve as a peacekeeper, as you mentioned, in Kosovo. And that in itself was a humbling experience. I didn't even know how to dress myself anymore, right? And so I had a lot to learn. But the peacekeeping missions, both the one in the Balkans, my first one, and the second one in the Middle East, they really taught me a lot. And I think you're referring to the opening story in my book, which sort of drove home this notion of a deeply humbling experience. So I was a keen student of the conflict. So during training, I learned a lot. I read a lot about the Kosovo War, and when we deployed, I felt, I know a lot. I pretty much figured out what's going on. And then I will never forget, a few weeks into deployment, we were invited to an end of year school play. As the NATO representatives, we were, guided to the front of the room where we sat down, and then we watched in shock and horror how kindergartners and first and second graders were reenacting the war. So this is in the Albanian part of Kosovo. Albanian kids sort of, on stage massacring Serbs on the ground, all to the roaring applause from other students, parents, teachers. And so I'm sitting there, politely applauding, and it really hit me that I thought I understood this conflict. I thought I knew what's going on. And I sat there going, I still have so much to learn. Like this is so beyond what is comprehensible for me, like these little kids reenacting war and everybody's cheering. And so, it drove home this notion that humility is actually about asking bigger and better questions. So I share a story in the book at the beginning also where I drop a flak jacket and I get chewed out by a young sergeant for it. And so my question there was, how do I be sure I never ever drop that flak jacket again? To sitting there at that school play and wondering, what's our role here as peacekeepers? Do these people really want peace? Do they want reconciliation? What can our part be? And is it our job as peacekeepers to not only build peace in their cities and streets, but also in their hearts? And it made me realize, which then, of course, and that was confirmed over the next few months, and then my second peacekeeping mission in the Middle East for sure, it'll take generations to actually come to a lasting peace. But this notion that the more we know, the less we might actually understand, but the quality of our questions improves. And I think that is transferable to all of us in leadership and in life. You will find, my experiences at least, that often the people who know least actually are the loudest in the room. But the people who ask deeper and better and harder questions are often the wisest in the room, not always the loudest. But in my book, that is truly the test for wisdom and indeed humility, the ability to ask deeper and harder and more difficult questions rather than having easy answers.
I love that. And also when you ask those questions, you are building trust too, because you are listening to people and connecting with them. Thank you so much to that shift of transparency.
Yeah,
That's
and you're so right. I mean, this sort of goes a little bit into the vulnerability piece as well. If I, and it needs to be genuine, of course. I really want to learn. Let's say I want to learn about you, Karl. I want to know what your career aspirations are. Where do you want to go? Where do you feel you want to get better, want and need to get better at? So I share my learning, my growth mindset with you. I want to learn more about you. I might even share with you that I'm working on XYZ to get better. And so that's, showing up with a bit of vulnerability. I don't have all the answers. Hence, I need to ask better and harder questions. And that is an incredibly powerful way to build trust indeed.
Mm-hmm. And engage the team. Thank you so much. And also you mentioned about fearless and confidence, and are not exclusive to each other, are concepts that are aligned. But also you mentioned how you admire leaders that are humble. So share with us about those three, and maybe there is a leader that you admire that you would like to share about.
Absolutely. So, I often get challenged on podcasts like these, or when I'm speaking, or just in conversations. So explain to me, how can I be confident, and how can I be ambitious and still be humble? And so I think that I would like to turn those or that preconceived notion on its head, actually. So I put forward that confidence and humility actually go hand in hand rather than being a contradiction. So the way I think about this is, in order for me to ask the hard questions, such as, for example, what can I do better as your manager, Karla? Or why is this project failing? And I'm owning the project. And why aren't we as successful as we need to be? In order to ask those hard questions, I need to be fundamentally humble questions. I need to be fundamentally confident in myself. Only if I'm fundamentally confident in myself, have a strong sense of self, have a deep understanding of where I'm good at and where I need to get better, only then can I actually show up with true humility and ask those difficult questions. And so I think about confidence and humility going hand in hand, and similarly, ambition and humility. So only if I ask hard questions, why am I failing? What do I need to get better at? Can I really achieve? And obviously achieving is the very definition of ambition, but those questions require some humility. And you ask about, leaders. I write about a bunch of leaders in the book. One of the best known ones is, of course, Satya Nadella from Microsoft. I mean, Nobody can argue that under Nadella's leadership, Microsoft has been immensely successful. I think the stock is probably up about 1,000%. But you remember in 2014, Satya Nadella was on stage during a conference that celebrates women in computing, and he was interviewed by a board member. And the board member asked him, "So Satya, how should women ask for a pay raise?" And his response was, "I don't really think women should ask for a pay raise. They should just trust karma and trust that the system will eventually reward their efforts." And that is how he knew he messed up. He messed up in a big way. But then Satya Nadella showed up with true humility and vulnerability. He immediately apologized on Twitter, former X. He put out an all-company email and an online statement the same day and said, "I've answered the question completely wrong. Men and women should get equal pay for equal work. If you believe you deserve a raise, you should just ask." And looking back on the incident a few years later, he even says, "In a way, I'm glad I messed up in such a public forum because it helped me to address an underlying bias I didn't even know I had." Like, that is humility. We all mess up. We all make mistakes. We all do, okay? And so he publicly acknowledged it, took ownership, took responsibility, and made it right. And, I'm not a Microsoft expert, even though I live in Seattle, but an important component of Microsoft's success has been the ability to attract, retain, and make successful diverse leaders, including women. And so, I have a bunch of other leaders. Brad Smith, I share in the book, former CEO of Intuit, who posted his 360 publicly. So he did a 360, sent his 360 report to every single person in the company, put a copy on his office door for everybody to see. That requires guts and humility, and he built humongous trust across all of Intuit. So these are a couple of examples. Well, maybe a last one, very well known, of course, as well. Jacinda Ardern, former New Zealand Prime Minister, who was a tough leader during the Christchurch bombing, and then at the onset of the COVID crisis, and I know not all Kiwis agreed with her later on, but she stepped down, and her words when she stepped down as Prime Minister were, "I know what this job takes, and I simply don't have enough in the tank anymore to do it justice." It's as simple as that. Sometimes humility is knowing when it's time to step down from a job, from a position, from a role. So that was Jacinda Ardern at its best.
Thank you for sharing those examples that are really good examples from about the framework that you share with us. And you have coached many teams. Is there any breakthrough that made you feel proud of implementing this and looking into a transformation driven by the framework?
Maybe I'd like actually to share a transformation, if you want to call it that, with a team I led. And that was actually during my, not coached, but led during my time in Kosovo. And one of the things I was very proud about was that I never felt nervous about leaving my team by itself. So, I had leave or I had to go to an important briefing to HQ or whatever. I never felt nervous about leaving my team by itself. Why? Because I really made a true effort to empower everybody to make good, smart, independent decisions at the front lines without having to check with me. And one concrete thing I implemented in order to prepare my people to get there is I had each of my team members shadow our counterparts at HQ. So we were a team out in the field, and we had to report every day to HQ, to staff officers, and we only knew them over the phone. And that this was before we did Microsoft Teams and Zoom meetings. So I had my team members actually shadow these staff officers for a day or two. So they shadowed them, they got to know them personally, so they could put a face, a personality behind the name. They went for lunch, maybe they had a drink at night together. And they also learned the pain points and needs of the recipient of our work. So if you think about it, if you're in a business where you have front of the house people and back of the house, you maybe have a sales force, maybe you have people in the field and you have a back office, there's innate conflict always there. So I sort of forced my team members to get to know our clients, if you want to put it that way. And because they had then that deep knowledge about what our clients, our staff officers, our recipient of our work needed, I felt totally comfortable to leave my team by itself. And so the way this is implementing humble leadership, as I mentioned earlier, is relational leadership. Getting to know my team members, getting to know the staff officers at HQ on a personal level, building a personal relationship, made them much better at making independent decisions on their own. I also, as I mentioned before, the importance of a common goal. I relentlessly communicated one goal per month, like literally one thing. Maybe it was safety, like 0 accidents this month. Like that's the one thing. And so when I wasn't there, the question was, what's the common goal? What's most important? Like, let's hit that out of the park, and everything else is just gravy. So when I then left my team, I never felt nervous about them doing the job on their own. They truly did feel empowered. So this sounds like a little bit like rah, 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 how well I did, but that is actually one of the things I did do well as a leader. Plenty of other things I still need to work on, but that's one of the things I did well.
Yes, I know you are a lifelong learner, but it's so important because no AI, no technology will replace that human connection of learning about your client and being close to your client. And then for you as a leader, feeling, having that trust and making your team accountable, but empowering them with that one goal. Thank you so much, Urs. I really appreciate that. Well, we are heading the end of this time together. Tell us about what unleash leadership means to you.
By the way, I love that title of your podcast. So to me, it's actually almost coming back to the last question. Unleash leadership means that the team is executing, is performing, no matter if I'm there or not. So the way I think about it is the true trust of leadership is how the ship runs when you are not there. And so, I challenge my clients sometimes, work yourself out of a job. I'm to make the point, I'm simplifying it a little bit, like make yourself obsolete. Like every single decision that comes across your desk, every single to-do list on your to-do list, who else can do this? Really ask yourself to push everything as far down as possible. So then when you're not there, then the magic can still happen. So to me, unleash leadership means the ship runs incredibly well, even if I'm not there. And my people perform at their best, even if the leader is not there. That's unleashed leadership to me.
Thank you so much. Anything else that you would like to share or an advice for emerging leaders?
I'm going to repeat the feedback and combine it with introspection. The way I think about improving in leadership in life is we need to get data out in the real world, however this might look. It could be feedback around our interpersonal skills as leaders. And then we need to process that feedback, maybe by talking to a mentor, to a coach, maybe journaling, maybe we meditate on, however this looks, we write about it. And so this is the introspection. And then we go out in the real world again and we try it on and we get feedback and then we bring it back to our own quiet life. And so this making a conscious effort to do both these things, the iterative process of out in the real world and spending quiet time reflecting, which I know many of us don't take enough time to do. So I think that's an important thing I'd like to emerging leaders to take away.
Well, thank you. That is powerful. Thank you for your legacy, for creating that radical humility movement in the world. And it's been an honor to have you with us today. Thank you.
Thanks for the great work you're doing, Karla. I appreciate it.